Immigrants make up 14% of the American population, with nearly 1 in 7 people in the country being foreign-born individuals, and yet they remain one of the most neglected groups where policy change and reform are concerned. Many immigrants spend their life in limbo and at the mercy of a bogged-down immigration system riddled with bureaucratic red tape. For the nearly 45 million immigrants in the country, immigration reform is not only a necessity, but the need of the hour. I'm Andres Mejer, immigration attorney and an immigrant myself. And in today's video, we'll be talking about immigration in the United States and key immigrant statistics. We'll also be addressing some of the misconceptions surrounding documented as well as undocumented immigrants. In the same vein, we'll also talk about President Biden's addressal of certain Trump-era immigration policies, including the recent suspended expedited removal policy that left immigrants at risk of being deported without due process. If you started your immigration journey or are thinking of doing so, keep watching the video till the end to learn about immigrants in the United States and immigration trends, as well as get recent updates about relevant immigration policies. And if you find the video helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel and checking out our other videos. Now let's get into it. Topic 1, immigration in the United States of America. We often talk about immigrants are the backbone of American society and the economy. But how accurate are these statements? Really? On one hand, we have people acknowledging that immigrants helped build America into the nation it is today. On the other hand, we see a strong anti-immigrant sentiment, and we saw an example of that in President Trump's administration. Immigrants were painted out to be criminals who had entered the country illegally and were stealing American jobs and resources. And while these claims were successful in making sensational headlines, they're not backed by evidence or facts. We can get a clearer picture once we view the latest immigration statistics to the United States. Figures from the Census Bureau tells us that out of 328 million people living in the country in 2019, 45 million were immigrants, making up 14% of the population. 22 million of these were women, 20.4 million were men, and 2.5 million were children. These numbers are significant, but they are by no means extraordinary. The number of foreign-born people in the US gets higher every year, but their percentage relative to the rest of the population is consistent. In fact, this is by no means the highest percentage of immigrants in the country. In 1890, immigrants made up over 15% of the population. But unlike 1890, more than half of the immigrants now in the country are naturalized. By 2019, 23.2 million immigrants had naturalized, meaning became US citizens, which is 52% of the immigrant population and about 7% of the total US population. On top of that, 8.1 million more immigrants are eligible for naturalization and have not pursued it for several reasons. Factors such as lack of interest, personal barriers, financial barriers, and language barriers lead to low naturalization rates, particularly in Mexican-born immigrants. Another factor may be the recent trend of more Mexican-born immigrants leaving the US rather than coming here. All in all, 14%, a good number, though by no means a majority of people living in the US are immigrants. And if we consider the 38.3 million native-born Americans who are the children of these immigrants, the number jumps to 26%. So about a quarter of the people living in the US are immigrants or the children of immigrants, with 1 in 7 being an immigrant and 1 in 8 being the child of at least one immigrant parent. These figures are important because they tell us these are people that cannot be separated from American communities or the labor force. And to stereotype or generalize all immigrants is not only unfair, but untrue. So where do these immigrants come from? The United States has the most extensive immigration system in the world and is home to more immigrants than any other country in the world, about 1/5 of the world's migrants, or 20%. On average, 1 million immigrants arrive in the United States every year. This pool of immigrants is also incredibly diverse, with people of all nationalities and ethnic backgrounds included. However, most immigrants in the US come from only a couple of countries. About a quarter of all immigrants in the US come from Mexico, and around the same number from Asia. In terms of numbers, 24% of immigrants have Mexico as their country of origin, 6% have India, 5% have China as their country of origin, respectively. The next largest groups are the Philippines, making up 4.5% of all immigrants, and El Salvador, making up 3% of all immigrants. Now, this distribution isn't exactly random. The reason many immigrants come from Mexico is because of family reunification. These people come to the US to join family members that are already in the country. As for China and India, many employers seek skilled workers from these countries, and many of the immigrants from these countries are in the US with H-1B visas, which is the visa for foreign workers in specialty occupations. On top of these immigrants, we also have refugees who are resettled in the United States every year under the 1980 Federal Refugee Resettlement Program. In 2019, 30,000 refugees, primarily from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Burma or Myanmar, Ukraine, Eritrea, and Afghanistan were resettled in the country. In 2020, as we know, only 11,000 and change were allowed into the United States. But interestingly, not only do most immigrants hail from a handful of countries, but they also live in a small number of US states. 45% of the country's immigrants are living in only 3 states: California, 24%, Texas, 11%, and Florida, 10%. Surprise, surprise, they're all warm countries. States. In fact, in 2018, there were more than 10 million immigrants living in California alone. Most immigrants, roughly 67% of the immigration population, live in 20 metropolitan areas all over the country, with the largest populations being in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami metropolitan areas. Most of the country's unauthorized immigrant population, unsurprisingly, are in the same places. Speaking of the non-citizen immigrant population, there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding them as well. There are approximately 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country, a number that is nearly triple what it was 20 years ago. In July 2021, Customs and Border Patrol reported the highest monthly number of people in 2 decades, nearly 212,000 trying to cross the southern border. But this doesn't mean that most immigrants came to the country illegally. In fact, according to the data from the Pew Research Center, 77% of all immigrants are in the country legally. So where does the claim that most immigrants are here illegally come from? Well, some immigrants do cross the border to come into the country illegally. However, many undocumented immigrant population is actually made up of people who came into the country legally but have overstayed their visas. By the way, that's how I got here. One of the reasons behind this is the slow rate of processing in the immigration system, where immigrants often must wait many years after application before they receive their green card or lawful permanent resident status. A significant number of these undocumented immigrants are waiting for their green card applications to be processed and have been waiting for years. Now, to address the claim that many immigrants are a burden on the country's economy, statistical data about the contribution of immigrants in the United States labor force can't be overlooked. In fact, 1 in 6 workers is an immigrant, and they are an irreplaceable part of the labor system. The number of immigrants working in the US economy is over 28 million, and it can be found in every industry. Approximately 5% of the workforce is made up by undocumented immigrants. Talking of immigrants in the labor force, an eye-opening statistic population can be attributed to the healthcare and social services industry. The US Census Bureau 2019 data shows that 4 million immigrants played a part in health and social services. To put that into context, that is 4 million people working in essential services to ensure the health and social well-being of the American people. This number is more significant when we consider COVID-19 pandemic and its implications on the US. These were the same people working in ERs, care and assistance departments to protect us. Other industries also have a remarkable immigrant population that works day and night for a prosperous US economy. About 3 million immigrants work in manufacturing companies, while at least a little less than 3 million workers in the accommodation or hospitality and food services are immigrants. That amounts to more than 6 workers that participate in the labor force providing essential services. From the food you eat to the products you use, your comfort and access are reliant on the millions of immigrants who provide these services. If you consider the number of immigrants in the retail service labor force, you'll see a figure of nearly 3 million people. Even the spaces you live in and places you visit are the product of citizen as well as non-citizen efforts. Census data shows that 2.9 million immigrant workers in construction, playing a part in the creation of the foundation of housing, workplaces, and buildings. Another important thing to note is that most immigrants are not the tax evading residents that some people make them out to be. In fact, immigrants contribute billions of dollars to the economy and in taxes. In 2019, immigrant-led households across the US paid a total of $330.7 billion with a capital B in federal taxes and $161.7 billion in combined state and local taxes. And that's just considering legal immigrants. In the same year, households headed by undocumented immigrants in the United States contribute approximately $18.9 billion in federal taxes and $11.7 billion in combined state and local taxes. On top of that, according to research, immigrant-led household residents had 1.3 trillion, capital T, in collective spending power after tax income in 2019. This means that immigrant consumers are responsible for adding over $8 trillion to the US economy. Let that number sit with you for a second and let it clear up any misconceptions about the role of immigrants in the labor force. All these facts and statistics only serve to remind us that immigrants are not just numbers. They're individuals, real people who live, study, and work with us. These are the people who are suffering because of our bogged down immigration system and inadequate immigration reform. Immigrants came to the country for a better, safer life, and in line with the American values of freedom and refuge, it is our responsibility to help them achieve that dream. Unless Congress acts on immigration reform and the Biden administration pushes to reform the immigration system, immigrants and subsequently our economy will continue to suffer. Topic 2. The Biden administration has suspended a Trump-era policy that put immigrants at risk of being deported without due process. For our second topic, let's talk about recent updates to immigration policies. On October 14th, a spokesman for the Department of Homeland Security stated that former President Trump's expansion of the expedited removal policy for immigrants has been suspended. This came as a robust action from the Biden administration after the president ordered a review of the immigration policies when he assumed office. A report by the DHS is currently underway as they examine whether the expedited and the expanded expedited removal policy should be modified or rescinded altogether. Until the report is completed, DHS announced the suspension of the Trump-era change to the expedited policy. So what does this mean for the future of undocumented immigrants in the United States? First, let's examine what the expedited removal policy is, how it is used, what impact Trump's modification had, and where are we today? The Department of Homeland Security oversees immigration proceedings, and the notable branches under it include Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. The main difference in these bodies is that CBP oversees immigration matters on the borders of the US, while ICE deals with immigration proceeding within the country. In general, CBP has more actionable and quick standards of procedure, which include immediate deportation within 72 hours. For ICE, domestic cases that require legal action and detention are more common. If an immigrant is suspected of violating any laws, they may be detained and their case is taken to court for decision. Once the detention occurs, they have a right to access legal counsel, collect documentation, and face trial, which would decide their stay within the US. They are either deported as a result or granted eligibility to apply for legal status within the country. The expedited removal could be seen as reserved for special circumstances for immigrant matters. Enforced by ICE, the policy states that undocumented immigrants within 100 miles of a border can be deported immediately without legal proceedings if their stay in the US spans less than 2 weeks. When Trump began his crackdown immigration policies with the intention of limiting immigration to the US, this policy was targeted. In his reformation of the expedited removal policy, he expanded the scope of the special circumstances that it was used. It stated that now, undocumented citizens all over the country who could not prove their residence in the United States for 2 years or more could face expedited removal anywhere in the country. That means they could be arrested, detained, and deported immediately without seeing a judge. This new change was implemented in 2019, and obviously it instilled a new wave of fear and uncertainty in the immigrant population. We had many conversations about it. Not only had the location parameters been expanded, but the time limit had also been increased, meaning a larger population was at risk of immediate deportation without seeing a judge. Human rights advocates argue that the process of being arrested and detained by ICE can be traumatizing for many, but the panic of being unable to gather and provide documentation fast enough added to the mental stress. Under the Trump-era policy, many undocumented immigrants were targeted unfairly, removed without access to legal counsel or proceedings, which led to a backlash from immigration advocacy and legal groups. After the reformed policy was introduced in 2009 that lengthened the scope of expedited removal, a federal judge blocked the action in September of the year, reinforcing the parameters of the original order. U.S. District Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson stayed the expansion decision, calling out the administration for not complying with standards of procedure when it comes to policy change. This provided hope to undocumented immigrants as they would not be subject to such a harsh policy, but that didn't last long. In June of 2020, district judge's order were overturned by a court of appeals, and Trump's expanded expedited policy was implemented. To talk a little bit about the implications of the order, as we discussed previously, the decision could be termed inhumane and unfair, as advocates and human rights groups argued. CBP and ICE are two independent bodies in charge of specific matters, and the expanded range of removals could have perhaps made more sense if it was granted to only Customs and Border Patrol. However, the policy expansion meant that such speedy removal was applicable to anybody, anywhere in the United States. The expedited removal policy itself was formulated for specific circumstances, and correct legal proceedings for all non-citizens was the rule. In a change to the policy, immigrants' humanity wasn't really considered. Immigrants who flee war-torn countries or face political persecution are promised asylum and aid under the American Constitution. The matter of providing logistically the high-stake nature of an immigrant's migration is difficult, as such circumstances are difficult to quantify. Yet the Constitution, the single framework that is the building block of American law and order, provides certain safeties that allow such immigrants to have a second shot at life. One such safety is the guarantee of due process under the Fifth Amendment. That means notice and an opportunity to be heard. Those two things are usually framed in a complaint in front of a court and an opportunity to answer and defend the accusations. That's due process. This clause was cited by advocacy groups when they challenged the Trump order to expanded expedited removal, claiming the move was unconstitutional. The right to due process ensures every decision is just and fair, equipped with access to legal proceedings as the decision decides the fate of your life. With former President Trump's decision to expand the expedited removal policy, people were robbed of the opportunity to access justice. Now, in the Biden administration, there's an opportunity for expectations and a hope for the immigration population. The review of the expanded expedited policy is not complete, but the suspension of the order is a step in the right direction. From beginning of the year to August, data shows that 4 immigrants were deported from the country under the expanded expedited policy, and there's a potential that may be the last. President Biden stated that the outcome of the review would consider our legal and humanitarian obligations, alluding to how compassionate American values are being reintroduced into immigration-related policymaking. This aligns with the overall stance that the Biden administration has taken on immigration, with several policy introductions and changes. From the rescinding of the travel ban of people from the Muslim-majority countries to efforts to reunite families that were split up under Trump's stricter ICE detentions, immigrants are finally being granted humanity and justice under Biden. Still, there are many harsh and inhumane policies in place that target the well-being and lives of undocumented immigrants in the U.S., with little addressed from the Biden administration. In one notable decision, even President Biden's sincerity to improve the immigration system is limited. This can be, the Haitian deportation of nearly 5,500 Haitians that were living in or residing in Del Rio, Texas, for example. Another 8,000 that accepted voluntary removal to Mexico. Such immigrants were asylum seekers, and they were not provided with their constitutional right to access. Title 42 policy was used to deport the Haitians in this case, which allows border control officers to essentially turn away asylum seekers through the pandemic. Title 42 was just a convenient way to avoid due process. This policy is a reminder that greater efforts should be taken to address all aspects of immigration policies so there could be a holistic approach to improving the immigration system. That wraps up our video for today. If this video is of value to you, please consider liking and sharing it with people who may find it helpful. Also, drop any immigration-related questions you have in the comments below, and we'll do our best to provide an answer for you. Call us today if you want to discuss your case or need help on your green card or immigration journey. We'll let you know when and how we can help you. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and take care.